My dear friend, let me tell you something that took me most of my life to understand. Something I wish someone had sat me down and explained when I was your age. When I was just a young printer's apprentice with ink-stained fingers and dreams bigger than my empty pockets. You see, I've watched thousands of people throughout my lifetime, and I've noticed something heartbreaking, something that keeps me up at night even now. Most people will spend their entire lives working harder than they've ever worked before, putting in more hours than should be humanly possible, sacrificing their health, their time with loved ones, their peace of mind. And yet somehow, no matter how much they hustle, no matter how many extra shifts they take or side jobs they pick up, they remain broke. Not just broke in their bank accounts, but broke in their spirits, broke in their hopes, broke in their very souls. And here's what troubles me most. What really breaks my heart when I see it happening again and again, it's not because they're lazy. It's not because they lack intelligence or drive or determination. It's because nobody ever taught them the one fundamental truth about money that changes everything once you truly grasp it deep in your bones. Now, before I share this truth with you, I need you to understand where I'm coming from, because I wasn't born into wealth or privilege or some fancy family with connections. I was the 15th child of 17 children. Let that sink in for a moment. 15. My father was a soap and candle maker, and we barely had enough to go around. I had only 2 years of formal schooling, just 2 years, before I had to start working to help support the family. I was apprenticed to my brother at 12 years old working in a print shop, and let me tell you, those were some of the hardest years of my life. But they were also the years that taught me everything I needed to know about the difference between working for money and making money work for you. You see, in that print shop I learned something that most people never figure out in their entire lives. I watched my brother James work himself to exhaustion every single day. 16, 17-hour days sometimes. His hands were always stained with ink, his back always aching. And yes, he made money, but he was trapped. Every dollar he earned required another hour of his life, another piece of his health, another sacrifice of his time. I was just a boy, but I could see it clearly. This wasn't freedom. This was just a different kind of prison. So I started thinking differently. While I worked during the day, I read at night every book I could get my hands on. I taught myself mathematics, philosophy, science, writing, and I started to notice patterns in how money moved, how businesses operated, how wealth was really created. Here's what I discovered, and listen carefully, because this is going to challenge everything you think you know about making money. Wealth isn't created by working harder. With youeverythink.com, wealth isn't created by working harder. It's created by working smarter, yes, but more than that, it's created by building systems that work without you. Let me explain what I mean. When I finally left my brother's shop and started my own printing business in Philadelphia, I didn't just become another printer working long hours. I built something different. I created partnerships with printers in other colonies. I published newspapers and almanacs that sold year after year. I invested in paper mills. So I controlled my supply chain. Each of these things, once set up, generated income whether I was physically present or not. That's the secret. That's what the wealthy understand that the working class doesn't. You don't get rich by selling your time. You get rich by creating assets that generate value independently of your direct labor. Think about it this way. If you're a carpenter, you can build one chair at a time and sell it. That's trading time for money. But if you design a chair, create a workshop, train other carpenters, and sell hundreds of chairs made by your system, now you're building wealth. You've moved from being in the business to owning the business. This distinction, this fundamental shift in thinking, is what separates the rich from everyone else. The rich don't think in terms of hours traded for dollars. They think in terms of systems that produce dollars while they sleep. When I established my printing business, I didn't simply become a better printer. I created a network of partnerships, standardized processes, and trained apprentices who could execute my vision. The business ran whether I was physically present or not. That's the game. You see this principle everywhere once you start looking for it. A doctor trades time for money. earning perhaps hundreds per hour. Impressive, yes, but still capped by the hours in a day. But a doctor who opens a clinic, hires other physicians, and takes a percentage of their billings, that doctor has created a system. The clinic generates revenue from multiple sources simultaneously. One is practicing medicine, the other is practicing wealth creation. Here's what most people miss. Building wealth isn't about working harder. It's about working differently. It's about leverage. And there are three primary forms of leverage the wealthy use to multiply their efforts: people, capital, and what I'd call reproducible systems. Labor leverage means having others work within your framework. When I published newspapers, I wasn't setting type for every page myself. I had apprentices, journeymen, partners in other cities. My ideas and systems multiplied through their hands. One mind, many bodies, executing the vision. Capital leverage is using money to make money. The initial capital I accumulated from printing. I didn't hoard under my mattress. I lent it out at interest. I invested in other ventures. I understood that idle money is like idle land, it produces nothing. Money must work, must circulate, must multiply. But the most powerful leverage, the one that echoes through centuries, is creating something reproducible. My almanac sold year after year, requiring minimal additional effort from me after the initial creation. Write it once, sell it thousands of times. This is the leverage of systems, of intellectual property, of processes that can scale. The wealthy understand this instinctively. They're not looking for jobs. They're looking for opportunities to create systems. They're not asking, how can I earn more per hour? They're asking, how can I remove myself from the equation while the value continues to be created? That's the fundamental shift in thinking that changes everything, and I've seen it play out in ways most people never notice. Consider the difference between two entrepreneurs I knew. The first opened a restaurant. Beautiful place, excellent food. But he insisted on being there every day, overseeing everything, convinced that his personal touch was what made it special. The second, Las. She opened a restaurant too, but spent her first year building systems, training managers, documenting every process until the place could run without her. Within 3 years, she had 5 locations. He still had one, and he was still there every night, exhausted. Same business, completely different philosophy about value. The first believed his value was in his labor. The second understood her value was in her thinking. And here's what's fascinating. The market doesn't care about your effort. It never has. The market cares about results, about solutions, about value delivered. You can spend 16 hours making something by hand, pouring your soul into it, and the market might value it at $20. Or you can spend 16 minutes identifying a problem and connecting the right people to solve it, and the market might value that at $20,000. This offends our sense of fairness. We want to believe that hard work automatically equals high value. We want to believe that suffering and sacrifice should be directly rewarded. But that's not how value works. That's not how it's ever worked. A surgeon performs a procedure in 90 minutes and charges $15,000. Is she being paid for the 90 minutes? No. She's being paid for the 10 years of training, the hundreds of procedures she's observed and practiced, the knowledge that allows her to solve in 90 minutes what would kill you in 90 days. The value isn't in the time. It's in the transformation. And once you understand that, once you truly internalize it, you start seeing opportunities everywhere. You stop thinking, what can I do? And start thinking, what problems can I solve? What transformations can I create? What systems can I build? You start realizing that the biggest opportunities aren't found in doing more of what everyone else is doing. They're found in thinking differently about what creates value in the first place. And when I think about creating value, I come back to a principle that served me throughout my life. The best investments generate returns long after the initial effort stops. The printing business I built didn't just make money while I was physically operating the press. I created systems. I trained people. I established partnerships that generated income while I slept, while I conducted experiments, while I negotiated treaties in France. That's the shift you need to make in your 20s. Stop trading time for money in a linear way. Start building assets that compound. And here's what most people miss. The smallest decisions create the biggest divergences over time. You choose to learn copywriting instead of just posting randomly on social media. 5 years later, that skill has generated hundreds of thousands in revenue because you can sell anything you create. You choose to build an audience around a specific problem you solve instead of just being an influencer. 5 years later, you have a community that trusts you, buys from you, and refers others to you automatically. You choose to create one online course instead of trading all your hours for consulting fees. 5 years later, that course has sold to thousands of people while you were building other things. These aren't dramatic decisions in the moment. They're just slightly different choices. But compounded over time, they create completely different lives. I think about the Franklin stove. I could have patented it. I could have extracted every penny from that invention. But I didn't. I let it spread freely because I understood something crucial. Some assets appreciate by being shared, not hoarded. Your ideas work the same way. The knowledge you share openly today becomes the reputation you profit from tomorrow. The free value you give becomes the trust that converts to sales next year. This is where most people get it backwards. They hoard everything behind paywalls. They keep their best ideas secret. They're so afraid someone will steal their knowledge that they never build the visibility that creates opportunity. I published my electrical experiments freely. That made me famous. That fame created opportunities worth far more than any short-term licensing fee ever would have. When you share knowledge, you create something. Economists haven't quite figured out how to measure. You create gravity. Ideas attract other ideas. Generous people attract opportunities. The London Royal Society didn't elect me because I hoarded my discoveries. They honored me because I gave them away. Every university degree, every diplomatic posting, every door that opened in Paris and London, those came from radical transparency, not secrecy. Here's what your business professors won't tell you. Scarcity thinking is expensive. When you clutch your ideas close, you pay compound interest on missed connections. Every conversation you avoid, every collaboration you reject, every person you refuse to help, those are investments in isolation. And isolation pays terrible returns. I've watched this pattern repeat across 3 centuries now. The people who become indispensable aren't the ones with the best secrets. They're the ones who make everyone around them smarter. They're the ones who answer questions, who share techniques, who treat knowledge like a fire that grows brighter when you use it to light other flames. You think Taylor Swift became the biggest artist alive by hiding her songwriting process? She created behind-the-scenes content showing exactly how she works. You think Mr. Beast built an empire by keeping his strategies secret? He published his entire playbook for free. The most successful creators of your era became successful by making success reproducible. This goes against everything your scarcity-minded competitors believe. Good. Let them encrypt their mediocrity while you build a reputation for generosity. Let them guard their small innovations while you create a movement. The mathematics are simple. Your knowledge locked in your head has exactly one potential application. Your knowledge in the world has infinite potential applications. Most of those applications will surprise you. Some will come back around to benefit you in ways you never imagined. I shared my electrical work freely. Decades later, those same principles powered the French support for American independence. The scientists I'd befriended in Paris convinced their government that Americans were sophisticated, curious, worthy allies. My open-source approach to science created diplomatic capital I couldn't have purchased at any price. The colonies were nothing backwater territories squabbling among themselves, drowning in debt from the French and Indian War. We had no standing, no credibility, no reason for a great power like France to risk war with Britain on our behalf. Except we did have something. We had me, standing in Parisian salons, demonstrating electrical experiments to intellectuals who wrote letters to ministers, who whispered in the king's ear. I didn't arrive in France as a diplomat making demands. I arrived as a scientist with a reputation. The lightning rod wasn't just protecting buildings in Philadelphia, it was protecting buildings in Lyon, in Marseille, in Chateau across the countryside. French translations of my electrical papers were more widely read in Europe than in America. When I walked into Versailles, I wasn't a stranger begging for favors. I was Benjamin Franklin, the man who'd tamed lightning, the American who proved that genius could emerge from wilderness. You see, I'd built something far more valuable than a military alliance. I'd built cultural credibility. I'd proven that Americans weren't provincial yokels playing at civilization. We were contributors to human knowledge. We belonged at the table where serious people discuss serious ideas. And here's what amazes me about that whole episode: none of it was calculated. I didn't share my electrical discoveries thinking, this will be useful when I need to secure French military support in a revolution that hasn't happened yet. I shared them because keeping knowledge locked away offended my sense of how the world should work. This pattern showed up everywhere in my life. The lending library I started in Philadelphia wasn't a political strategy, it was just practical. I wanted to read more books than I could afford, and I figured others did too. We pooled our resources, shared what we had, simple. But years later, when I needed to convince farmers and merchants and tradesmen that they had as much right to govern themselves as any aristocrat, what do you think helped? The fact that these same people had been meeting in libraries, reading philosophy, discussing ideas, treating themselves as capable of serious thought. I'd been helping build a citizenry that believed in its own intelligence. The fire company, same thing. Philadelphia kept burning down, so I organized neighbors to fight fires together, just common sense. But in the process, we created a model for how ordinary citizens could organize themselves to solve problems without waiting for authorities to save them. That habit of self-organization, that confidence that you and your neighbors could handle serious challenges, you think that wasn't useful when we needed to create a government from scratch? Even Poor Richard's Almanac, which most people remember for homespun sayings about early to bed and early to rise, that wasn't just folksy entertainment. I was putting practical philosophy, scientific information, and the habit of self-improvement into the hands of farmers and shopkeepers, making knowledge something that belonged to everyone, not just the educated elite. Here's what I'm driving at. Usefulness has a timeline you can't always see. When you hoard knowledge, keep your discoveries secret, refuse to share your methods because you're worried someone else will benefit. You're not just being stingy. You're betting against the possibility that your generosity might come back to help you in ways you cannot possibly predict. And here's the thing that makes this more than just enlightened self-interest. Even when it doesn't come back to help you specifically, it still ripples outward. Knowledge shared becomes knowledge improved. Your discovery becomes someone else's starting point. That's what separates us from every other creature on this earth. A beaver builds a dam through instinct, and the next generation of beavers builds the exact same dam in the exact same way. But humans? We build on what came before. Gutenberg didn't just invent the printing press. He stood on the shoulders of Chinese woodblock printers, Roman scribes, and every person who ever thought there must be a better way to share what we know. When I published my experiments with electricity, I made them freely available because I wanted every curious mind in the world working on the same problems. And what happened? Within years, scientists across Europe were building on my work, correcting my errors, taking my crude observations and turning them into elegant theories. My single candle lit 1,000 others, and suddenly we went from parlor tricks with static to understanding one of the fundamental forces of nature. This is why I get genuinely frustrated when I see people hoarding knowledge like misers hoarding gold. That professor who refuses to share their research until it's published in the right journal. That craftsman who takes their techniques to the grave rather than training apprentices. That programmer who writes deliberately obscure code so they'll remain indispensable. They think they're protecting their value, but they're actually diminishing it. Because here's what they don't understand. Knowledge doesn't diminish. When shared, it multiplies. The value isn't in being the only person who knows something. The value is in what gets created when many minds tackle the same challenge together. No great advancement in human history was achieved by one person keeping secrets. They were achieved by communities of knowledge, by ideas building on ideas, by the frank exchange of failures as much as successes. I witnessed this truth firsthand when I established the Junto, that gathering of leather aprons and inquiring minds where we met every Friday evening to discuss philosophy, morals, and the pressing questions of our day. We had no professors among us at first, no men of great title or fortune. What we had was curiosity and a willingness to share what we'd learned without pretense or pride. And what came from those humble meetings? The Library Company of Philadelphia, the American Philosophical Society, the First Subscription Fire Company, the University of Pennsylvania. None of these institutions were the product of one brilliant mind working in isolation. They emerged from conversation, from one person's half-formed idea meeting another's practical experience, from questions that sparked better questions. You see, knowledge compounds like interest, but only if it circulates. A gold coin buried in your garden earns nothing. A shilling invested in an enterprise that employs others, that purchases goods, that generates commerce, multiplies its value throughout the community. Ideas work the same way. The insight you share might be worth little on its own, but combined with someone else's experience, it becomes something neither of you could have created alone. This is why I published my experiments with electricity not in coded language but in clear terms that any educated person could follow. This is why I refused patents on my inventions: the Franklin stove that heated homes more efficiently, the lightning rod that protected buildings from fire, the bifocals that helped aging eyes read again. What good would it do me to die the richest man in the cemetery while my neighbors froze in winter or watched their houses burn? True wealth, I came to understand, isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you circulate. Money that sits in a chest is like water in a stagnant pond. It breeds nothing but mosquitoes. Money in motion, flowing through a community, creating opportunity, solving problems, lifting others, that's the currency of a life well lived. Let me tell you about one of the proudest moments of my life, and it had nothing to do with dining with kings or signing treaties. It happened in Philadelphia, in a small room above a print shop, when a group of ordinary tradesmen, a glazier, a surveyor, a cobbler, and myself pooled our books to create America's first lending library. We called it a subscription library because each member paid a small fee, and in return, we all had access to books that individually we could never afford. Do you understand what we created there? We didn't just share books, we shared the possibility of transformation. A young apprentice who couldn't afford a single volume could now read Locke, Newton, Addison. Knowledge, which had been the private preserve of the wealthy, became a public good. And what happened? Philadelphia exploded with innovation, with civic improvement, with educated citizens who could participate meaningfully in democracy. That library still exists today. Every public library in America traces its lineage back to that room above the print shop. Millions of people have improved their lives because a handful of tradesmen decided their books shouldn't gather dust on private shelves. This is what I mean by contribution over accumulation. We could have hoarded our books, charged exorbitant fees to access them, created an exclusive club for the elite. Instead, we built something that would compound in value with every person it touched. And here's the paradox that most people miss. That library made me wealthier, not poorer. Because what is wealth, really? Is it the coins gathering dust in your strongbox? Or is it the trust of an entire community? The goodwill that opens doors before you knock? The network of educated minds that generate opportunities you never could have imagined alone? When a young printer needed advice, he came to me first because I'd freely shared my knowledge. When merchants needed someone trustworthy to handle the colonial postal system, they thought of Franklin because I'd proven I worked for the common good. When the colonies needed representation in London, who did they send? The man who'd built a reputation not through hoarding, but through generous distribution of value. You see, scarcity thinking tells you that if you give away your slice of the pie, you'll have less pie. But abundance thinking understands that sometimes giving away your slice teaches others how to bake, and suddenly there are a dozen pies cooling on windowsills throughout the neighborhood. I published Poor Richard's Almanac for 25 years, sold it for pennies. filled it with wisdom I could have kept to myself, proverbs about thrift, about industry, about the very principles that had made me successful. A penny saved is a penny earned. Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. I gave away my philosophy of success for the price of a loaf of bread. Was I foolish? Did competitors use my own wisdom against me? Perhaps. But here's what actually happened. Those almanacs spread my name, my reputation, my ideas into every corner of the colonies. They made Benjamin Franklin synonymous with practical wisdom. And that reputation became worth more than any secret I could have kept locked away. Now, you might be thinking, that's all well and good for someone selling almanacs, but I'm not in that business. Fair enough. But the principle applies whether you're selling wisdom, widgets, or your own professional services. Consider the modern expert, the consultant, the creator, the professional who makes their living from what they know. They face the same dilemma I did. Give away too much, and people might think they don't need you. Hold everything back, and people never discover you exist in the first place. The ones who thrive? They understand something profound. Sharing your knowledge doesn't diminish you, it amplifies you. I learned this lesson again when I conducted my experiments with electricity. I could have kept my discoveries secret, tried to profit from them exclusively, maybe built some contraption and charged admission to see it demonstrated. Some natural philosophers did exactly that, treating knowledge like a magic trick, valuable only when hidden. Instead, I published my findings. I wrote letters describing my experiments in detail, the kite, the key, the Leyden jar, everything. I sent these letters to the Royal Society in London, and they were read, copied, translated, and distributed across Europe. Did this generosity cost me? On the contrary. It made my reputation international. When I later traveled to England and France on diplomatic missions, I wasn't just some colonial printer, I was the renowned scientist, the man who'd tamed lightning. Doors opened that would have remained forever closed. But here's the deeper truth I discovered. When you give away knowledge freely, something remarkable happens. People don't take it and disappear. They come back with questions. They want clarification, application, customization. They want your wisdom applied to their specific circumstances. Information alone isn't enough. Anyone could read my almanac's advice on planting crops, but the farmers still needed to understand their particular soil, their specific climate, their unique challenges. This is why the most valuable thing you can offer isn't just knowledge, it's understanding. When I helped draft the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson had all the philosophical knowledge necessary. The man had read Locke, Montesquieu, every Enlightenment thinker worth reading. But what made that document powerful wasn't just repeating those ideas. It was applying them to our specific situation, understanding the particular grievances of the colonies, translating universal principles into words that would resonate with farmers in Virginia and merchants in Massachusetts alike. Your audience comes to you because you understand something they don't, not just the general principle but how it applies to their world. When someone searches for how to grow tomatoes, they don't just want botanical facts. They want to know if they should start seeds indoors in their climate. They want to understand what that yellowing on the leaves means. They want someone who's grown tomatoes, failed with tomatoes, learned from those failures, and can guide them through their own journey. This is the alchemy of modern content, transforming information into understanding, knowledge into wisdom. And here's what makes this particularly valuable in your era. Information has been democratized, but understanding hasn't. Anyone can access facts now. But making sense of those facts, knowing which ones matter for your specific situation, that still requires human insight, experience, and judgment. I see creators who treat their audience like empty vessels to be filled with information. They dump facts and hope something sticks. But the successful ones, they treat their audience like apprentices to be guided. They don't just tell, they show, explain, anticipate questions, address concerns, build understanding layer by layer. Think about how I wrote Poor Richard's Almanac. I didn't just print astronomical calculations and farming schedules, though those were valuable. I wrap them in stories, proverbs, humor elements that help people remember and apply the information. Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise isn't just advice about sleep schedules. It's a framework for thinking about how daily habits compound into life outcomes. This understanding that information needs an emotional and practical container applies directly to what you're doing on YouTube. You could create a video titled 5 Time Management Tips and list bullet points. Some people might even watch it, but a week later, they'll remember nothing. Or you could do what I did with Poor Richard's Almanac. Wrap those same principles in narrative, personality, and pattern. Tell the story of how you almost missed your daughter's birthday because you couldn't say no to requests. Show the physical exhaustion, the guilt, the moment you realized something had to change. Then introduce the principles as the solution you discovered, not abstract tips, but tools forged in the fire of real consequence. The difference between information and wisdom is application. And application requires memory. Memory requires emotion. Emotion requires story. I didn't just write maxims, I created a character, Poor Richard, who embodied them. He wasn't Benjamin Franklin, the successful printer and civic leader. He was a humble astrologer with money troubles and a sharp-tongued wife, offering observations about human nature with a wink. That distance, that slight fictional remove made the wisdom more digestible. People accepted criticism from Poor Richard. They might have resented from me directly. Your YouTube persona serves the same function. Even if you're speaking as yourself, you're curating which version of yourself to present. The you who appears on camera is you, yes, but you edited and intentional. You've selected which struggles to share, which victories to highlight, which aspects of your personality to emphasize. This isn't dishonesty, it's craft. It gives your audience permission to learn from your experience without feeling lectured. And here's what most creators miss. Your audience doesn't want you to be perfect. They want you to be relatable and aspirational simultaneously. They need to see themselves in your struggles while believing your solutions might work for them too. This is the dance, my friends, the delicate balance between I'm just like you and I've found a way forward. I learned this the hard way during my early days in Philadelphia. When I first arrived in that city, I was 17, broke, and walking down Market Street with rolls stuffed under my arms because I'd bought more bread than I could carry. I looked ridiculous. My future wife, Deborah, saw me that day and laughed at the sight. Years later, when I'd become successful, I could have hidden that story. I could have pretended I'd always been dignified and prosperous. But instead, I told it freely. I put it in my autobiography. Why? Because that image of the awkward young man with bread under his arms made everything I achieved afterward feel possible to others. You see, when people only see your success, they can't bridge the gap between where they are and where you are. The distance feels insurmountable. But when they see your messy beginning, when they understand you started from a place of confusion and struggle, suddenly the path becomes visible. This is why vulnerability isn't weakness in content creation, it's strategic genius. And this is crucial, vulnerability without direction is just complaining. You can't simply wallow in your struggles and expect your audience to stick around. They need to see that you're learning, adapting, moving forward. They need to witness your evolution in real time. Think about the structure of every compelling story ever told. Somebody wants something, faces obstacles, and transforms in the pursuit of it. Your YouTube channel should follow this same arc, except it's happening over months and years instead of 90 minutes. Every video is a chapter. Every failure you share is a plot twist. Every lesson you learn is character development. And your audience? They're not just watching. They're experiencing their own transformation alongside you. That's the magic of vulnerability. When you let people see your struggles, they see themselves. When you share your victories, they feel hope for their own. You become a mirror that reflects not just your journey, but their potential. I learned this the hard way. My first viral video? It wasn't my most polished work. It was me, exhausted at 2 a.m., talking about why I almost quit. Raw, unscripted, real. And people times connected times with that more than any perfectly edited piece I'd ever created. Because here's the truth nobody tells you. Polish can create distance. Perfection can build walls. But authenticity? That's a bridge straight to the heart. Now, let me share something that changed everything for me, the power of consistency over intensity. We live in a culture obsessed with viral moments. Everyone wants that explosive video that changes their life overnight. And look, I'm not against that. But I've watched countless creators ride a viral wave to 1 million subscribers, then disappear because they couldn't sustain the momentum. You know what's more powerful than one viral video? 50 good videos. 100 decent videos. The compound effect of showing up week after week, building trust brick by brick. Think of it like the printing press I helped improve back in my day. One broadsheet reaches a few dozen people, but print consistently, distribute reliably, and suddenly you're shaping entire communities. YouTube works the same way. Each video is a brick. You're not building a house with one brick. You're building it one brick at a time, and eventually, you've got something magnificent. I've seen creators burn themselves out chasing virality. They throw everything at one video, pour their entire soul into it, expect it to explode. And when it doesn't, devastation. They feel like failures. But the creators who succeed, they understand that consistency compounds, that trust accumulates, that showing up matters more than showing off. That's why the most successful YouTubers build their channels like I built my printing empire brick by brick, day by day, with an obsessive focus on the fundamentals. They don't wake up asking, how can I go viral today? They ask, how can I serve my audience better today? They don't check their analytics every 5 minutes hoping for a miracle. They check their analytics to understand what's working and what needs improvement. They don't chase every new trend and platform. They master one thing first, then expand strategically. And here's what happens when you commit to this approach. You build something that can't be easily replicated. Think about it. Anyone can copy your video style. Anyone can steal your thumbnail design. Anyone can imitate your editing techniques. But nobody can replicate 10 years of showing up. Nobody can fake the trust you've built with your community. Nobody can duplicate the deep understanding you've developed about your audience's needs. That's your real competitive advantage. Not your equipment, not your editing skills, not even your personality. Today the day prob. Today bragand, today day bragand, today bragand, today day bragand. Today bragand, today bragand, today bragand. Your advantage is your commitment to the long game. I've seen creators with mediocre production quality build massive, loyal audiences because they showed up consistently and genuinely cared about their viewers. And I've seen incredibly talented creators with Hollywood-level production fail because they treated their channel like a lottery ticket instead of a business. The difference? One group understood that YouTube success is a marathon, not a sprint. They paced themselves accordingly. They didn't burn out trying to post daily when weekly was sustainable. They didn't exhaust themselves chasing perfection when good enough would serve their audience. They built systems. They created processes. They made sustainability a priority from day one. Because here's what nobody tells you. The biggest risk to your YouTube success isn't algorithm changes or increased competition. It's you quitting. That's it. That's the risk. Most creators don't fail because they weren't good enough. They fail because they stop before the compounding kicks in. They plant the seed, water it for 3 months, see no fruit, and walk away never knowing they were 6 months from harvest. I learned this lesson viscerally in my printing days. My first year in Philadelphia, I barely scraped by. My second year, I lost money. By year 3, I was questioning everything, my skill, my judgment, my decision to leave Boston at all. But I kept showing up, kept running the press, kept publishing the Gazette, and somewhere around year 4, something shifted. Not because I suddenly got better at printing, I'd been competent all along, but because people finally knew who I was. Trust had accumulated. Reputation had compounded. By year 5, I had more work than I could handle. By year 7, I was training apprentices. By year 10, I was expanding to other colonies. The same effort that produced nothing in year 1 produced abundance in year 10. Same me, same work, different results. Same me, same me, same me, same me, same me. This is the part nobody warns you about, the brutal middle section where you're doing everything right and nothing's working yet. Where you're consistent, you're improving, you're patient, but the numbers are still flat. That's not failure, that's time's lag asterisk. Every system has lag built into it. Plant a tree, you don't get fruit the next morning. Launch a ship, it doesn't reach full speed immediately. Start a channel, you don't hit your stride in month 3. The amateurs quit during the lag. They interpret the delay as a verdict. They think not yet means not ever. But the professionals, they understand that lag is simply the cost of entry. It's not a bug in the system, it's the system itself. You want to know the real secret to YouTube success? It's almost disappointingly simple. Asterisk. Don't stop. Asterisk. Not be brilliant. Not go viral. Not crack the algorithm. Just don't stop. Keep uploading. Keep improving. Keep showing up. Let time and consistency do the heavy lifting while you focus on making each video slightly better than the last. Because here's what I've observed across 3 centuries of human endeavor: the winners aren't usually the most talented. They're the most persistent. Now, let me address the voice in your head telling you that you're too late to the game, that YouTube is saturated, that all the good ideas have been taken. I hear this in every era, rephrased for the times. All the good land has been claimed. All the patents have been filed. All the newspapers have been started. It's never been true. You know what was saturated in 1729? The printing business in Philadelphia. Well, there were already established printers with deeper pockets and better connections than a 23-year-old runaway from Boston. By conventional wisdom, I should have apprenticed myself to one of them and hoped for scraps. Instead, I did something different. I didn't try to outprint the competition, I outthought them. I wrote better. I published content people actually wanted to read instead of what I thought they should read. I showed up consistently when others operated sporadically. I built relationships with readers by speaking to them like humans instead of preaching from a pulpit. The game hasn't changed. The platform has. This feeling, YouTube isn't saturated with good creators. It's saturated with people who treat it like a lottery ticket. They post 3 videos, get discouraged by low views, and quit. They imitate what's already successful instead of finding their own angle. They focus on gaming the algorithm instead of serving actual human beings. This creates opportunity for you, not despite the competition, but because of it. Most of your competition will eliminate themselves through inconsistency and imitation. They'll chase trends that don't fit their strengths. They'll burn out trying to be Mr. Beast when they're built to be Vsauce. Your job isn't to compete with everyone on YouTube. It's to find the intersection of what you're genuinely interested in, what you're capable of sustaining, and what a specific group of people actually wants to watch. That Venn diagram overlap, that's your niche, regardless of how saturated it appears. I published Poor Richard's Almanac for 25 consecutive years in a market flooded with almanacs. Mine succeeded because it was distinctly mine, filled with the kind of practical wisdom and wit that reflected my voice, not a pale imitation of what was already selling. What's your equivalent? What can you bring to your topic that sounds like you and only you? The answer lies in examining your own peculiar combination of experiences, beliefs, and obsessions. When I began writing Poor Richard's Almanac, I wasn't trying to compete with other almanacs on their terms. I added something they lacked: humor, memorable aphorisms, and practical philosophy woven through astronomical calculations. Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Wasn't revolutionary wisdom, but the way I packaged it made it stick in people's minds for centuries. Your uniqueness might come from an unexpected angle of approach. Perhaps you're teaching photography. but you spent 10 years as a psychologist, and you understand how people's internal narratives affect how they see the world through a lens. That intersection, that's your voice. Maybe you're covering personal finance, but you grew up in poverty and understand the psychological weight of scarcity in ways that well-meaning financial advisors who've never missed a meal simply cannot. I've observed that the most compelling voices often emerge from contradiction or unlikely combinations. The scientist who loves poetry, the athlete who studies philosophy, the business person who's deeply spiritual. These tensions create texture in your perspective that pure specialists lack. Here's a practical exercise I recommend. List 3 unusual experiences from your life that most people in your niche haven't had. One from one. One from one. One from one. One from one from one. Then consider how each of those experiences gives you a different lens on your topic. When I was a printer's apprentice, I learned that presentation matters as much as content, a lesson that informed everything I published later. When I nearly drowned as a young man, I developed a healthy respect for preparation and risk assessment that colored my advice on everything from business to politics. Your voice also comes from what you're willing to say that others won't. Not controversy for its own sake that's tiresome and cheap, but honest observations that others dance around because they're worried about offending someone or going against conventional wisdom. I learned this early in my printing career. The do-good letters worked not because I was trying to be provocative, but because I said what widows actually thought, what apprentices actually felt, what ordinary citizens actually believed but couldn't articulate in the flowery language of the day. Everyone knew the town's preachers were long-winded. Everyone felt the class system was ridiculous. Everyone saw the hypocrisy in how the elite conducted themselves, but no one wrote it down plainly. When I did, people recognized truth immediately. That recognition, that's the spark you're looking for. Your audience doesn't need you to reveal information they couldn't find elsewhere. They need you to say what they've been thinking but couldn't express. They need you to validate observations they've made but doubted. They need you to connect dots they sensed were related but couldn't quite link. This requires courage, but not recklessness. Know the difference. I critiqued power structures, but I studied them first. I challenged religious orthodoxy, but I understood theology deeply. I questioned colonial policies, but I'd read every relevant document. You can't thoughtfully challenge what you don't thoroughly understand. The modern creator who rants without research, who criticizes without comprehension, who dismisses without investigation, that person isn't brave, they're lazy. And audiences eventually recognize the difference between informed dissent and performative contrarianism. But when you've done the work, when you truly understand the subject, when you've thought deeply about the implications, then speaking uncomfortable truths becomes not just acceptable but necessary. That's when your voice matters most. The topics themselves will vary by your field. In my time, it was politics and religion and social customs. In yours, it might be business practices everyone accepts but shouldn't, creative advice that sounds good but doesn't work, or industry standards that serve gatekeepers rather than audiences. Whatever your domain, there are sacred cows no one questions. Question them. There are obvious problems everyone ignores. Name them. There are better approaches everyone overlooks because they're unconventional. Propose them. This isn't about being negative. I was an optimist who believed progress was possible. That's why I bothered criticizing what held us back. If I thought nothing could change, why write at all? I criticized because I cared. I poked fun at pomposity because I believed in substance. I questioned authority because I trusted reason. I did 2% at 80 in substance of this came. I was important. Every satire, every pseudonym, every pointed essay, they weren't the work of a cynic, but of someone who genuinely believed people could do better if only they'd stop fooling themselves. And here's what I've learned watching your century unfold. The greatest barrier to progress isn't evil. It's complacency dressed up as wisdom. It's the person who says that's just how things are while congratulating themselves on being realistic. It's the leader who mistakes stubbornness for principle. It's the society that confuses tradition with truth. You want to honor the past, then learn from it. don't worship it. We made mistakes, spectacular ones. We compromised when we should have held firm. We held firm when we should have compromised. We let fear guide us when courage was required. We acted boldly when caution would have served us better. The point isn't that we were wrong. The point is that we were times trying asterisk, constantly adjusting, willing to admit when something wasn't working. That's the real legacy worth preserving, not our conclusions, but our commitment to questioning them. I spent decades in scientific inquiry, and you know what the most important phrase in science is? I don't know, but let's find out. Not, I don't know. So let's keep doing what we've always done. Not, I don't know. So let's defer to whoever sounds most confident. Uncertainty isn't weakness, it's the beginning of understanding. The moment you pretend to have all the answers is the moment you stop learning. And the moment you stop learning is the moment you start dying intellectually, morally, spiritually. So when I look at your world with its unprecedented access to information, its global connectivity, its technological marvels, and I see people using all of it to become more times certain, asterisk more times tribal, asterisk more times, convinced that they alone possess truth, I want to shake them gently. Because I'm dead and lack the corporeal form necessary for actual shaking, but you understand my meaning. The real tragedy isn't disagreement. Disagreement is essential. It's how we sharpen ideas, test assumptions, discover flaws in our reasoning. No, the real tragedy is the certainty times, that makes disagreement impossible. When someone believes they have nothing to learn, conversation becomes pointless. They're not engaging with you. They're simply waiting for their turn to speak, or worse, not waiting at all. I see this in your political discourse especially. Each side has constructed elaborate fortresses of ideology, complete with moats, drawbridges, and very loud defenders on the ramparts. They lob insults and accusations at each other while refusing to venture out and actually examine the other side's position. It's siege warfare, but nobody's trying to win. They're just trying to outlast each other, to prove their own righteousness through sheer, stubborn endurance. And here's what breaks my heart. Both sides often have legitimate concerns. Both sides have experienced real problems, real injustices, real fears. But instead of recognizing the complexity of human society, the fact that multiple things can be true simultaneously, that trade-offs exist, that good people can reasonably disagree about solutions, they retreat into absolute positions. You're either with us or against us. If you question any part of our program, you're the enemy. Nuance is weakness. 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 Nuance is not weakness. Nuance is intelligence. Nuance is the recognition that the world is complicated, that simple solutions to complex problems are usually wrong, and that wisdom often lies in the tension between competing goods rather than in the triumph of one over another. I remember the debates in Philadelphia, the long summer of 1787, when we hammered out our Constitution. Do you know how many compromises that document contains? Dozens. Hundreds. If you count the small adjustments, the careful wording, the deliberate ambiguities left for future generations to interpret. We can Bega's merit, with tense pertek, the great compromise. The 3/5 compromise, shameful, yes, and we should acknowledge it as such, but necessary to bring the southern states to the table at all. The compromise between those who wanted a strong executive and those who feared monarchy, between large states and small, between federal power and state sovereignty. Were we cowards for compromising? Were we weak for refusing to draw absolute lines and say, this way or no way at all? No. We were practical. We were wise enough to know that a constitution that pleased everyone completely would please no one enough to ratify it. We built a system that could bend without breaking, that could grow and adapt, that contained within itself the mechanisms for its own improvement. That's what I see missing today, the recognition that today's solution may need to be tomorrow's revision. That we can do our best with the information we have, while remaining humble enough to change course when we learn more. The loudest voices today speak in absolutes. This is the only way, science says, as if science is a monolith rather than a process of constant questioning and revision. Studies show as if one study settles a question forever rather than opening new lines of inquiry. I was a scientist, remember? I played with electricity when most people thought I was courting divine punishment. I invented, I experimented, I published my findings. And you know what I learned? That every answer raises 3 new questions. That certainty is the enemy of discovery. That the moment you think you've figured something out completely is usually the moment before you realize you've been wrong about something fundamental. I've noticed this particularly in my experiments with electricity. The more I learned, the more I realized how little I actually knew. When I first started, I thought lightning was perhaps some kind of fire in the clouds. Simple. Direct. Wrong. Then I proved it was electrical in nature, and I felt triumphant. I'd solved the mystery. Except, that discovery immediately spawned dozens of new questions. Why do some materials conduct electricity while others don't? What exactly is this fluid that seems to flow through metals? Is it truly a fluid at all, or something else entirely? How does it relate to the electricity produced by friction machines versus the electricity in lightning? Are they the same phenomenon or different? Each answer was like opening a door into a room filled with more locked doors. And, I've made my peace with that. In fact, I've come to love it. Because that's what being curious actually means, not having all the answers, but being comfortable enough with uncertainty that you keep asking questions anyway. The people who claim absolute certainty about how the world works, they've stopped being curious. They've traded discovery for the comfortable illusion of complete understanding. They've chosen the appearance of wisdom over the messy, uncertain, glorious reality of actual learning. I'd rather be confused and searching than certain and stagnant. This is why I've never been comfortable with people treating my ideas as if they're sacred texts that can't be questioned. Everything I've written, everything I've discovered, everything I think I know, it should all be subject to scrutiny, testing, potential disproof. That's not a weakness of knowledge. That's its greatest strength. The willingness to be wrong is what separates curiosity from dogma. The ability to say, I thought this was true, but new evidence suggests otherwise, so I'm changing my mind. That's not flip-flopping or weakness. That's intellectual honesty. That's growth. I've changed my mind about dozens of things over my lifetime, hundreds, probably. Small things and large ones. And each time I've done so based on new evidence or better reasoning, I've felt not embarrassment but relief. Relief that I caught my error before I wasted more time being wrong. Relief that I'm still capable of learning. This is why I've always kept what I call a second opinion journal, not a diary of events, but a record of beliefs I once held strongly and later abandoned. It's a humbling document. In 1728, I was convinced that eating only vegetables would make me morally superior. I could barely tolerate the sight of others consuming meat. By 1730, I was back to eating fish, having reasoned that since fish eat other fish, perhaps the universal order wasn't quite what I'd imagined. Was my vegetarian phase wrong? No. It taught me discipline and expanded my perspective, but clinging to it when reason pointed elsewhere would have been mere stubbornness dressed as virtue. The truly dangerous minds aren't those who change direction. They're those who've calcified into their current position so thoroughly that no amount of evidence could move them. I've watched brilliant people destroy their own credibility this way, defending positions long after the ground beneath those positions has eroded completely. They become archaeologists of their own past certainties, carefully preserving what should have been allowed to decay naturally. You know what's fascinating? The people who accuse you most loudly of being inconsistent are often those who haven't genuinely reconsidered a major belief in decades. They've mistaken their stagnation for integrity. They point at your evolution as if it's a character flaw, when in fact their unchanging nature reveals nothing except that they've stopped paying attention to the world as it actually is. I've been called a flip-flopper more times than I can count. My response? I flip when new evidence appears. You're welcome to remain static if you prefer. But don't mistake your inflexibility for principle. The capacity to update your understanding isn't weakness. It's the only mechanism by which humans have ever improved anything, including themselves. The seventh virtue, sincerity. Use no hurtful deceit. Think innocently and justly. And if you speak, speak accordingly. Now here's where people get confused. They think sincerity means wearing your every thought on your sleeve, dumping your unfiltered opinions onto everyone like you're some kind of emotional fire hose. That's not sincerity, that's social incompetence dressed up as authenticity. Real sincerity is the alignment between your internal compass and your external actions. It's not about saying everything you think. It's about ensuring that what you do say, what you do choose to express, reflects your actual principles rather than convenient fabrications. I watched politicians in Philadelphia who could speak eloquently about liberty while profiting from the labor of enslaved people. I watched merchants who preached Christian charity while systematically defrauding their customers. And I watched myself write anonymous letters attacking people I wouldn't confront face to face, hiding behind pseudonyms while claiming to value directness. That last one stung when I finally acknowledged it. I justified it as strategy, as rhetorical necessity. But part of it was simply cowardice, the desire to land blows without accepting the consequences. Once I saw that clearly, I couldn't unsee it. Sincerity doesn't mean you reveal every strategy or expose every vulnerability. It means you stop lying to yourself about why you're doing what you're doing. It means your public positions actually reflect your private convictions, not just your political convenience. The test is simple. Could you defend this action if everyone knew your real reasons? If the answer makes you squirm, you've found your insincerity. I've seen people excuse their dishonesty by claiming they were protecting someone, when really they were protecting themselves from an uncomfortable conversation. I've seen leaders claim they were maintaining morale when they were actually concealing their own mistakes. These rationalizations satisfy no one except the person making them. Sincerity means when you praise someone, you mean it. When you commit to something, you intend to follow through. When you express concern, you're actually concerned. Revolutionary concept, apparently. And here's what that means in practice. You speak for yourself, not for others. You stop prefacing everything with "we need to" when you mean "I want to." You stop saying "people should" when you mean "I think." You stop hiding behind collective pronouns like "you're leading some imaginary army of agreement." I watched someone do this in a meeting recently. Every single opinion dressed up as consensus. We all feel that. No, you feel that. Everyone thinks, no, you think that. The general sentiment is, no, your sentiment is. And you know what happened? Nobody trusted a word out of their mouth because they were constantly manufacturing agreement that didn't exist. When you speak for yourself, you become accountable, and yes, that's scarier. It's easier to say many people are concerned about than I am concerned about. Because if you're wrong, if you're alone in that concern, you're exposed. But that exposure is integrity. That vulnerability is strength. That willingness to stand alone with your actual position is what separates the reliable from the rhetoric machines. This extends to promises. When you say you'll do something, you've created a small contract with reality. Most people scatter these contracts around like confetti, never intending to honor them. I'll call you. Let's have lunch sometime. I'll look into that. We should definitely do that. Empty, meaningless, social noise. Try this experiment. For 1 week, only make promises you absolutely intend to keep. Watch how few promises you make. Watch how much your language changes. You'll start saying, "I might be able to," instead of, "I will." You'll say, "That's not something I can commit to right now," instead of, "Yeah, sure, definitely." And the promises you do make, they'll carry actual weight. When you tell someone you'll do something, they'll believe you because you've stopped being the boy who cried commitment. And here's where it gets beautiful. When you become someone who keeps their word, you start attracting people who do the same. This is the law of resonance that I observed in Philadelphia's most successful merchants. The shopkeeper who delivered quality goods attracted quality suppliers. The craftsman who met his deadlines attracted clients who paid promptly. Your integrity becomes a filter. The flakes start falling away from your life like autumn leaves. The people who constantly cancel, who always have an excuse, who promise the world and deliver nothing, they begin to sense they're out of sync with you. They either step up their game or they drift toward easier targets, people who won't hold them accountable because they can't hold themselves accountable. Meanwhile, you start magnetizing the reliable ones. The woman who shows up 15 minutes early to every meeting. The friend who remembers what you said 3 months ago and follows up. The colleague who doesn't just meet deadlines but beats them. These people have been searching for someone like you their entire lives. They're exhausted by the flakes too. They've been waiting for someone who speaks their language, the language of follow-through. I've watched this transformation in my own social circles. When I finally became ruthless about my commitments, about saying no to what I couldn't genuinely support, and yes only to what I could fully invest in, my entire network shifted. The hangers-on vanished. The drama decreased. And suddenly I was surrounded by people who made things happen, who built rather than talked about building, who created results instead of excuses. Your reputation becomes your currency. In the colonies, a man's word was often more valuable than gold, because gold could be stolen, but a reputation for integrity opened doors that no amount of coin could unlock. The same principle holds today. When people know you're someone who delivers, they bring you opportunities before they go to anyone else. They invest in your ventures. They recommend you without hesitation. They trust you with their most important projects. Because that authenticity created something no amount of clever marketing ever could. A genuine relationship built on mutual respect and shared values. I've watched this principle transform careers in ways that seem almost magical. There was a craftsman I knew, a silversmith of modest means but extraordinary skill. He could have exaggerated his credentials, claimed apprenticeships he never had, or inflated his prices to seem more prestigious. Instead, he was utterly transparent. When a customer asked about a technique, he'd explain exactly how he learned it through trial and error, through studying the work of others, through years of patient practice. When his work had a flaw, however minor, he'd point it out himself before the customer noticed. Do you know what happened? His honesty became legendary. Wealthy patrons sought him out specifically because they knew he'd never deceive them. Other craftsmen, who had boasted and exaggerated, found their reputations crumbling when their claims couldn't withstand scrutiny. But this silversmith? His business flourished for decades, sustained entirely by the trust he'd built through unwavering honesty. The modern world has given you tools I could never have imagined. You can reach thousands with a single message, share your work with people across vast distances in an instant. But these same tools have also made deception easier and more tempting. You can curate a perfect image, hide your failures, present only your victories. Resist that temptation with every fiber of your being. Your audience, your clients, your followers, they're far more perceptive than you might think. They can sense when something rings false, even if they can't articulate exactly what troubles them. And once that seed of doubt is planted, it grows like a weed, choking out whatever goodwill you'd built. But when you're consistently authentic, when your private character matches your public persona, you create something rare and precious. You become someone people can fully trust. Not just trust to deliver good work, but trust to tell them the truth even when it's uncomfortable. Trust to admit when you're wrong. Trust to keep their confidences. Trust to give advice that serves their interests, not just yours. Trust to tell them the truth they need to hear, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. I've watched mentors fail at this more than anything else. They become so attached to being liked, so invested in maintaining a pleasant relationship, that they withhold the very feedback that could transform someone's life. I had a young printer once, talented hands. Good eye for detail, but terrible with customers. Abrasive, dismissive. Lost us business weekly. Dismissive, weekly. Dismissive, weekly breastive, 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 weekly. My other employees kept quiet. They liked him personally, didn't want to hurt his feelings. I pulled him aside one afternoon. "You're skilled," I said. "Perhaps the best typesetter I've employed. But you treat customers like interruptions to your work, when in truth, they are the very reason for your work. If you don't change this, you'll either remain forever in someone else's shop, or you'll start your own and watch it fail within a year." He was angry. Didn't speak to me for 3 days. But he changed. Slowly, grudgingly, at first, then genuinely. Years later, he thanked me, said no one else had cared enough to be honest. That's what real trust enables: honest feedback that serves their growth, not your comfort. Now, here's what builds it: consistency over time. You cannot manufacture trust quickly. It's deposited in small increments, kept promises, honest conversations, moments when you choose their benefit over your convenience. I showed up, week after week, whether I had something profound to say or not, whether they'd made progress or seemed stuck. The message in my presence was clear: I'm invested in this. In you. I asked questions and actually listened to the answers, not just waiting for my turn to dispense wisdom, but genuinely curious about their thinking, their struggles, their perspective. I admitted my own uncertainties. "I don't know" is a powerful phrase in a mentor's vocabulary. It signals that you're human, that you're still learning, that this relationship isn't about you performing expertise, but about both of you pursuing truth. And I kept their confidences absolutely sacred. What they shared in our conversations stayed there, always, without exception. Trust isn't the foundation of mentorship, it's the structure itself. Without it, you're just two people exchanging words, not lives. And building that trust, it's not instantaneous. It's earned in small deposits over time. I'll tell you what erodes trust faster than anything: inconsistency. When you say you'll be somewhere and you're not. When you promise to review something and it slips your mind. When your mood dictates whether you're supportive or dismissive. Your mentee is watching. Not just your successes, but how you handle the mundane commitments. The small promises matter more than the grand gestures. I learned this from a young printer who worked under my supervision. Brilliant mind, questionable reliability. He'd show up late, forget instructions, make excuses that would make a politician blush. I tried patience. I tried stern words. Nothing changed the pattern. Then one day, I asked him a simple question: "Do you trust me to pay you fairly for your work?" He looked offended. "Of course, Mr. Franklin." "Then, why?" I asked. "Should I trust you to do the work you've committed to?" Well, 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 well. The parallel had never occurred to him. He thought trust was something he deserved automatically, not something he demonstrated through his actions. Within a month, his reliability transformed. Not because I'd threatened him, but because he finally understood. Trust is a mirror. What you see in others begins with what you show them. As a mentor, you must be that mirror first. Be so consistent, so reliable, so transparent in your intentions, that your mentee has no choice but to reflect those qualities back. Admit when you don't know something, acknowledge when you've made an error, follow through on every commitment, no matter how small. Show up not just physically, but emotionally present. I've watched mentors lose years of credibility in a single moment of defensiveness, refusing to admit they'd given outdated advice or made a wrong assumption. Their mentees didn't lose respect because they were wrong. Everyone's wrong sometimes. They lost respect because their mentor valued appearing infallible over being honest. Your humanity is not a weakness in mentorship. It's your greatest teaching tool. When you show your mentee how to fail gracefully, apologize sincerely, and course-correct humbly, you've given them a template for their entire professional life. Trust isn't about perfection. It's about authenticity, consistency, and the courage to be as demanding of yourself as you are of those you guide. The mentorship relationship, at its deepest level, is an exchange of humanity. I bring my experience, my scars, my hard-won wisdom. But what does my mentee bring? I have one mentee. Their fresh perspective, their questions that challenge my assumptions, Their energy that reminds me why this work matters in the first place. I remember mentoring a young woman who just moved into product management from engineering. She was brilliant, technically gifted, but terrified of stakeholder meetings. Before her first big presentation, I shared something I'd never told anyone in a professional setting, that I still got nervous before important presentations. That sometimes, right before walking into a room, my hands would shake slightly. She looked at me like I'd just revealed I was human, because that's exactly what I'd done. "But you always seem so confident," she said. "Confidence isn't the absence of fear," I told her. "It's the decision that the work matters more than the fear." She crushed that presentation, not because I gave her some magic formula, but because I normalized the struggle. I showed her that competence and vulnerability coexist in every professional worth following. That's the exchange I'm talking about. She brought me back to remembering what courage actually looks like. Not fearlessness, but action, despite fear, and I gave her permission to be both capable and human. The vulnerability becomes reciprocal. When I say, "I don't know," in front of my mentee, I'm not diminishing my authority. I'm expanding it. I'm showing them that expertise isn't about having every answer. It's about knowing how to find answers, how to think through problems, how to distinguish between what matters and what doesn't. One of the most powerful moments in any mentorship is when the mentee teaches the mentor. When they bring you a perspective you'd never considered, a tool you'd never used, a way of thinking that challenges your established patterns. I had a mentee introduce me to a completely different approach to data visualization that revolutionized how I presented quarterly reviews. These moments of reverse mentorship remind us that wisdom isn't confined to experience alone. Innovation often lives in the minds of those who haven't yet learned what's supposedly impossible. The mentee who's never been told that's not how we do things might be the one who discovers the better way to do things. I started incorporating this explicitly into my mentorship relationships. I'd say directly, "I expect you to teach me at least 3 things during our time together." It shifted the dynamic from hierarchical to collaborative. It gave mentees permission to challenge, to question, to contribute rather than just absorb. And here's what happened: they rose to that expectation. They brought me books I'd never have picked up, introduced me to communities I didn't know existed, explained technological shifts I'd dismissed as fads. My leadership improved not despite mentoring younger professionals, but precisely because of it. The relationship between legacy and mentorship goes deeper than most people realize. Your legacy isn't just what you accomplish, it's what continues after you. Every person you mentor becomes a living extension of the wisdom you've shared, adapted, and evolved for their context. I think about the leaders whose influence shaped me decades ago. Most of them are retired now. Some have passed away. But their frameworks still show up in how I make decisions. Their questions still echo in my mind when I'm facing a difficult choice. Their values still anchor me when I'm tempted toward expedience. They didn't just teach me skills. They embedded part of their thinking into mine. And now, when I mentor others, I'm passing along not just my own insights, but a chain of wisdom that extends back through generations of leaders. Each person adds their own layer, their own refinement, their own contextual adaptation. That's the compound interest of mentorship. You invest in one person, who invests in 3 people, who each invest in 5 people. Within a generation, hundreds of leaders are carrying forward principles that began with a single conversation over coffee. But here's the responsibility that comes with that. You have to be worthy of replication. When Extward, you have to be worthy of replication. When Extward, you have to be worthy of replication. Because whatever patterns you model, whatever values you embody, whatever shortcuts or compromises you normalize, those get passed forward too. If you mentor with ego, creating dependencies rather than capabilities, you're teaching the next generation to do the same. If you mentor with scarcity, treating knowledge as power to be hoarded, you're perpetuating that scarcity. But if you mentor with generosity, creating conditions where others can discover their own wisdom, where they can fail safely and learn genuinely, where they can eventually surpass you, then you're modeling something revolutionary. You're teaching them that leadership isn't about accumulation, it's about circulation. That mastery isn't a destination where you plant your flag, it's a responsibility to ensure the path remains open for those who follow. I think about this whenever I revisit my own writings, my own attempts to codify what I'd learned. The autobiography wasn't meant as monument, it was meant as map. Here's where I stumbled, here's what worked, here's what I wish I'd understood sooner. Take what's useful, discard what isn't, and for heaven's sake, improve upon it all. Because that's the real test of mentorship, isn't it? Whether those you've guided eventually outgrow you. Whether they take your lessons and build something you never imagined. Whether they have the courage to question your assumptions and the grace to acknowledge your contributions simultaneously. The mediocre mentor needs perpetual students. The exceptional mentor creates future mentors. And here's what nobody tells you about that transition. It's uncomfortable. When someone you've guided starts seeing connections you missed, solving problems in ways you never considered, challenging ideas you thought were settled, there's a moment where your ego has to die a little. Where you have to choose between being right and being useful. I had to make that choice repeatedly. With the young printers who improved my techniques, with the scientists who built upon my electrical experiments, with the political thinkers who took principles of liberty I'd articulated and pushed them further than I dared. Each time, I felt that small death of the ego. And each time, I discovered something magnificent on the other side, the expansion that comes from collaborative truth-seeking. The joy of watching ideas evolve beyond their original container, the deep satisfaction of knowing that my contribution wasn't an endpoint but a catalyst. This is the final paradox of mastery. The more you give away, the more you have. Not in some mystical sense, but in the very practical reality that teaching forces clarity, that explaining deepens understanding, that mentoring multiplies impact in ways individual achievement never can. The young apprentice who becomes your peer hasn't diminished your expertise, he's validated your ability to transfer knowledge, which is a far rarer skill than mere possession of it. And when he takes what you've taught him and builds something beyond what you could have imagined, you haven't been surpassed. You've been multiplied. I watched this principle work even in the contentious world of politics. The Constitutional Convention wasn't a room full of men competing to have the best idea. It was a space where ideas collided, merged, transformed, where my suggestion might spark your objection, which would prompt his modification, leading to something none of us could have conceived alone. The Connecticut Compromise wasn't anyone's victory. It was everyone's achievement. 1-7, through everyone's achievement. The modern obsession with individual genius blinds us to this collaborative reality. We tell stories about the lone inventor, the singular visionary, the revolutionary who changed everything. But dig beneath any historical breakthrough, and you'll find networks of contribution, chains of teaching and learning, ideas passed hand to hand like precious tools in a workshop. Edison gets credit for the light bulb, but he led teams of craftsmen and experimenters. Every scientist stands on foundations poured by predecessors. Every writer is shaped by every book they've read, every conversation they've had. Original thought is simply the recombination of inherited wisdom in patterns not yet tried. This doesn't diminish achievement, it properly locates it. Mastery isn't escaping the chain of human knowledge. It's finding your place in it, contributing your link, and forging connections to the next. I find peace in this. The weight of legacy feels lighter when you understand you're part of something larger than yourself. You know what I've learned about building something that lasts? It's not about the grand gestures. It's about the daily decisions nobody sees. The choice to be kind when you're exhausted. The effort to explain something clearly when you could take the shortcut. The integrity you maintain when no one's watching. I think about the libraries I helped establish. They weren't magnificent monuments when they opened. They were small rooms with borrowed books, but the principle was, sound knowledge should be accessible. That idea outlived the buildings. It's in every public library you pass today. The architecture changes, the technology evolves, but the core belief remains. Everyone deserves access to learning. That's what endures, not the thing itself, but the principle it embodies. And here's what gives me hope for you. You live in an age where your contribution can reach further than mine ever could. A single act of generosity, documented and shared, can inspire thousands. A clever solution to a problem can be replicated globally within days. The tools at your disposal are extraordinary, but with that reach comes responsibility. Every action is amplified. Every word spreads. This is both your advantage and your test. Will you use this power to connect or to divide? To illuminate or to obscure? To build up or tear down? I spent my life believing that we're better together than apart. That wisdom comes from many voices, not one. That progress happens when we share what we know freely. These beliefs guided every institution I helped create, every compromise I negotiated, every friendship I cultivated across differences. They're not complicated principles. They're almost embarrassingly simple. But simple doesn't mean easy. The work of building something meaningful is the work of showing up consistently. It's choosing patience over quick wins. It's investing in relationships that may not pay dividends for years. It's planting trees whose shade you'll never sit under, as the saying goes. And yes, you'll make mistakes. I made plenty. The key is what you do next.